thrift and looking for bargains, both home and abroad, would become hallmarks of John's investing career, which included the advent of the Templeton Growth Fund.
The fund was unique in that it looked all over the world for investments. It didn't confine itself to any market.
He pioneered global investing.
He was not parochial about being in the United States. His ability to look elsewhere made him really extraordinary.
He used common sense.
He was very inquisitive. He could absorb knowledge like a sponge.
Common sense ain't that common anymore.
In the late 1960s, John sold his advisory firm, but the buyer didn't want to purchase the Templeton Growth Fund because it was too small. So he kept it. Now in his mid-50s, he decided once and for all to get away from the herd mentality of Wall Street.
John was kind of the ultimate contrarian.
He moved, from Manhattan to the Bahamas. And one of the reasons to do that was he removed himself from the crowd.
Many people counseled him against this.
I was his first employee in Nassau, so it was Girl Friday. And he just then, of course, he'd only had the Templeton Fund.
The first Templeton office in the Bahamas was located in an attic space over the police station and a liquor store.
One of the things he said was that it's the safest place I could be. Who's going to break into a store that's right alongside the police station?
And everyone else had a skylight that leaked.
In 1974, John Galbraith joined Templeton.
John Galbraith said, look, let's work together. I'll distribute your funds.
It had some $13 million in it, so it was a teeny tiny fund.
That was a very, very important development for the success of the business.
And I said to John, I'll take on the marketing of this fund, and in 10 years, I'll have it up to $100 million.
That's when the talent started to come into the firm.
That was the beginning.
With Galbraith at the marketing wheel, money under management began to skyrocket, along with John's fame and reputation. He began appearing on the cover of Forbes and the Louis Rukeyser Show.
John Templeton remarked the other day, I am no wiser than I was 20 years ago, just better known.
Then everything expanded,
Soon the phone didn't stop ringing.
John was entrepreneurial by always doing what nobody else was doing.
When we were trading in Thailand and Singapore and countries that people didn't know exactly how we were even going to settle the trades, we were in the forefront.
John Templeton was way ahead of his time in the emerging markets.
He was investing in Korea before people were investing in Korea.
Japan, in the early 70s, was an emerging market.
Americans thought Japan could only make rinky-dink paper toys.
That's when John was building up his portfolio of Japanese stocks.
He had significantly underweighted the United States, and at that time, that was almost, heresy.
In the early days, I couldn't understand why he was going to these God-forbidden places, but he certainly was right.
There you go, the rest is history.
John was always looking around corners for opportunities, sometimes in the most unusual of circumstances, and often at the point of what John called maximum pessimism.
My stepfather had silver buried in an apple orchard in Ontario during the height of the Cold War.
He went to the bank and got as many silver dollars as he could.
He buried it so that
any of us got to it, they would have something to get the food and supplies with.
I received a letter my first year of college, and in the letter, it gave me instructions on how to get to the farm via the sewers.
Every crisis, John Templeton was in the midst of it.
There was the maximum pessimism. That was the buy signal.
John saw every downward turn in the market as an opportunity.
If a company is undervalued, he wanted to own it.
John's whole theory was you buy bargains.
Buy stocks that nobody else is buying.
Nothing presented a better opportunity for John than a market meltdown.
I was there in 1987.
The market's down 15%. People were panicked beyond comprehension. We'd never seen anything like it.
John came down to the trading floor.
And it's unbelievable. John, what do we do? And he said, let's go find stocks to buy.
He was the quintessential American in a number of respects, and one of those is his built-in optimism.
The glass was always half full with Sir John.
He was never flustered. He was very disciplined, and he was very patient as an investor.
Stocks we bought, we held for a long time.
The length of a hold on a security will average 5 years.
Today, the average stock on the New York Stock Exchange is bought and sold in 28 seconds.
He was able to delay gratification in a way that really doesn't come naturally to many people at all, but he could really take it to a different level.
The late 90s brought another opportunity for John. Technology stocks were going through the roof. Everyone was buying. But not John. He started betting against the market, shorting tech stocks, which simply meant that he would only profit if the market soured.
It's very scary shorting a stock in a market like that. It can conceptually go up forever, so your losses are infinite.
It was a little bit like standing in front of a train. It was frightening.
Even though his paper losses mounted, John stuck to his convictions and doubled down.
He ended up doing incredibly, incredibly well. But he knew that the bubble would burst.
He predicted the crash of 08 and the housing bubble bursting.
Even then, he had the vision.
John always reminded me a little bit of Yoda.
In spite of his extraordinary financial success, John never wavered from his commitment to thrift.
He was not interested in the trappings of wealth.
We lived very humbly. Very simply, he traveled economy.
He would not go over and beyond where it wasn't necessary.
He never dressed like a millionaire or a rich man.
He probably wore the same lime green suit for about 24 years.
John was one of the very early adopters of light sensors.
There were timers on the lights in the bathroom.
Lights would just go out. You just could not reach that sensor from where you needed to turn the light on.
I think anybody in America that grew up in the Depression in some ways changed your DNA.
I wish Uncle Johnny's thrift would rub off on my children.
My wife says, no, I'm not thrifty, I'm cheap.
I once asked him, why are you so vigilant when it comes to savings? And he said, well, for opportunities, of course.
It gave him the funds necessary to take advantage of volatility in the stock market. He always had ready money.
Thrift was only one of John's many principles.
The key Templeton principles that John Templeton really defined for an entire generation of investors were, one, don't follow the crowd.
Buy low and sell high.
Buy at the point of maximum pessimism.
For years, people, even sophisticated analysts from Wall Street, would say, what is your investment approach? And he said, well, I just search for bargains, which is perfect Tennessee talk.
He had a way of making things very clear that were very complex.
I asked Uncle John one time, I said, now, when's the best time to invest? When you got the money. Well, what's the market going to do? It's going to go up and down.
The ability of communicating his philosophy and how it was so commonsensical to people attracted investors.
He had the golden touch. Everybody wanted to come and see him.
I once asked my uncle if I could see him. He said, well, I can give you a half an hour between 9:30 and 10, about 3 months down the road. So
First time I've got is April 2nd at 8:35. Not 8:30, 8:35.
Everything was very regimented.
He was all concentration.
It was work, work, work. He was very conscious of the value of the dollar and of not wasting a dollar or a minute of time.
I finally talked him into going fishing, and all of a sudden he disappeared. We looked around to find him, and he was back in the cabin reading the Wall Street Journal.
He defied conventional wisdom in terms of how much you could get done in a day, in a week, in a year, in a lifetime.
He maintained a pretty
disciplined schedule.
He was prompt to be at the office at 8:30.
He would leave at 11 o'clock.
He would leave promptly at 11:30.
Lunch was to commence at 12:10, adhering to his strict schedule.
I know of many dinner parties where dessert hadn't been served and it was 9 o'clock and he would get up and leave.
He would say, it's time to go.
Check, please.
It didn't matter where he was, he could be eating with the Queen.
And so if you asked where he was, I'd tell you exactly and be accurate. He was that punctual.
He had a practice of walking a mile in shoulder-deep water.
Marching against the current up and down the beach.
Walking back and forth, maybe 50 yards.
I do remember when we were real little holding on to him, and he would drag us through the water.
He would put on pretty much the same outfit every day.
It was a regular sight.
He had a couple of bandages on his chest. He said the bigger fish have been biting me, but I've taken care of it. I'm having them removed. I thought, here we are in the ocean. He's going to have the fish removed. It turns out, a very practical solution. He went to a spear fisherman, and he said, I'll pay you so much for each fish. So he solved his problem.
Every time you think you had him pegged, he would surprise you.
John's thrift, work ethic, and practical approach was reflected in what was becoming a remarkable track record. He started to attract investors of all stripes and colors.
The first annual meeting was in Toronto.
And we got one shareholder. One person showed up.
And then by the mid-'80s, it was getting up into 10,000 people.
It was though a rock star had arrived on stage when he came out. It was really an amazing event.
I was absolutely blown away.
They were truly pilgrimages.
We'd always start with a prayer.
He'd sit at the side of the stage and he'd start answering questions about any topic you can possibly imagine.
Somebody would ask about General Motors, but then you'd have people ask about, what advice can you give me about raising my children? And it was just the most extraordinary thing that I've ever seen.
You could have heard a pin drop in that room. It was almost as if nobody was breathing because they were hanging on every single word.
John spoke from the heart. He told it straight. If we'd had a bad quarter, he would tell them exactly that.
He often said, I'm wrong 1/3 of the time, and I'm right 2/3 of the time, and fortunately that carries us.
He was the first really kind of rock star investor where people would travel all the way to Toronto to hear what he had to say.
John's record speaks for itself. $10,000 invested in 1954 would have grown to over $2 million by the time he retired in 1992.
John allowed ordinary investors to achieve financial goals that they otherwise didn't have the opportunity to achieve.
Shareholders would say, after 30 years, my kids went to college, they got graduate degrees, you've really transformed my life.
When you see the many scandals in the investment world, and then you look back and you see the long career of Sir John, and so principled.
He was honest. John Galbraith, in all the years that they'd worked together, they never had a legal written document.
There was not any contract.
He was careful to be very honorable.
He trusted people, and when you looked him in the eye and he looked you in the eye and you agreed on something, then that was good enough.
The word was his bond, and that was deeply important to him.
I remember in 1985, and the whole due diligence process to go public in London was extremely in-depth. The auditors could not believe that the firm had never been sued.
Legendary managers out on Wall Street, it meant a lot to them to get an allocation from John Templeton, not for the business, but because of what his standards were and what he represented as an investor.